Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor podcast. Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor, Devon Taylor, podcast. Hello, all, and welcome to another episode of the Devon Taylor podcast, where we have guests from all around the world tell their unique and powerful stories to not only allow their voice to be heard, but for you to feel inspired. Imagine being raised Catholic and then years later discovering that your family carried 8 generations of hidden Jewish heritage. A truth revealed only after a house fire, uncovering a box of family documents your father never spoke of. A truth that connects you to Gustav Klimt, the Holocaust, and one of the most remarkable legacies in medicine and art. This isn't fiction. This is history. And today we're diving into the Pulitzersaga with its author, Linda Broenniman. I don't know if I said that right. How do
Broenniman.
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 Thank you. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Devon. Thank you for having me on your show. It really is an honor to be able to talk to you and to talk about my journey. So thank you for having me.
Of course. And yeah, I was reading a little bit about your journey and it's astonishing. So I'd love for you to just kind of take us back to that moment when you discovered your father was Jewish.
Sure. I discovered that, as you said, we were raised Catholic. We went to church every Sunday, like good Catholic family. But when I was in my late 20s, by accident, my sister actually discovered that my father was Jewish. And I'll tell you about the accident. It's sort of interesting. My sister was a doctor and she attended a medical conference in Montreal. And she decided to stay with her godmother. And her godmother's family they went back generations with my family back in Hungary. Like our great grandmothers were best friends. So it was that kind of relationship. So she thought she was asking a very innocent question when she asked her godmother, what was my great grandmother Margit like? And the answer came back, well, like many Jewish mothers, she ruled the roost, but was very kind and so on. And so you can imagine my sister, I think her face just dropped. And her godmother said, whoops, I thought you knew. So that was how we discovered that my father's family was Jewish. And she came back. She came back and she didn't tell me right away. She told my brothers. And I'll never forget, I was coming home for a vacation and unpacking, and my brother walks in my room. And you can imagine, I'm not paying any attention. I'm just putting away my clothes. And he says, oh, I've got a secret. And I just sort of rolled my eyes and said, okay, what? And he said, Dad's Jewish. And, at the time, it didn't faze me. It almost felt like, oh, so what? And, I don't really care. And, religion just wasn't that big a deal to me. So I sort of took it in stride and went on. And, yeah. And then just sort of dropped it because at the time, actually, I was in graduate school and I was just focused on my career and what was I going to do with my life. And this whole, the fact that my dad was Jewish didn't really matter. Though I did go right away to my mother and ask my mother, is this true? And she said yes. But my father never, ever talked about it, never admitted to it till his dying day.
What do you think that is?
Well, I think they had gone through, my parents had lived through such trauma during the war, during the Holocaust. And my mother was Catholic. So I think it was just easier then for him to say, yes, we're Catholic. He did convert and go on and put the trauma behind him. And then I think later on when the family grew and I'm one of 7, so I've got a big family. Um, I think he just wanted to protect us, and for the longest time, we thought, oh, protect us from what? The US is, kind and generous, and you don't see that anti-Semitism, but you look at today and things certainly have changed. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm one of six, so I understand
You understand the big family.
the big family dynamic. So when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I
And
get that.
where are you in the list?
I'm number 4. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm
Youngest of the
smack
youngest.
in the middle, so I'm number 4 too.
Oh, wow. Coincidences, I love it. No, I understand that truly, and I've been going back and visiting a lot of my family and learning a lot of our history. So your story was really important to me to tell, um, and I've been feeling a lot of different, like, in between feelings, and so I kind of wanted to go into that, like how, and obviously you said like it didn't phase you when you first heard it and your brother told you, but as you went along, how did it feel to learn that history that your father had carried in?
Well, something, it was truly astonishing because we didn't know any of the history, and just as you said, um, when I was about 60, and I decided it was really time to look into my family history. I wanted to understand. And the only thing that I knew, I had remembered when my older brother, was in medical school, and he came home and he announced to my parents that he wanted to go into ear, nose, and throat. And I remember my mother saying, what's interesting is my father was completely quiet about it, but my mother said, no, "Oh, you have a very famous relative, Adam Pulitzer, who even to this day is considered the father of otology." So I remember the name Adam Pulitzer, but I really didn't understand, how we were related or whatever. So, fast forward 30 years and I decide, okay, it's really time to look into my family history. And so the only thing I remembered was Adam Pulitzer. So I started to Google him, and he's got his Wikipedia page, and he's got lots of pages. If I could speak and understand German, his textbooks are on the internet. And he created some of the first textbooks um, in otology, which is the study of the ear. Um, so I knew he was famous, but I had no clue how we were truly related. And I was just getting frustrated in my search. And then, just as you had said in your announcement, in 2011, so this was probably 2016, but in 2011, my parents' house had caught fire. And they lived in Buffalo. They still had lived in Buffalo. And my older sister, Madeline, lived in Buffalo, and she and her daughter and husband were, pulling out things from the house that if they hadn't burned, there was all the water damage from the fire trucks. So they were just pulling things out and trying to get them to safety to her home. And she had and she had taken a box, and she completely forgot about the box, completely forgot about it, got stuck in some closet. So when I started, looking into my family history, and I think it was 2015, she by accident, and I think there's miracles that happened all along the way to sort of point us, but she found the box that was stuck in the back of her closet. And she opened it, and she didn't, there were a lot of documents, they were all in Hungarian. So she knew I was starting to look into the family history, and she just, packed up everything and sent it to me. And wow, when I opened the box, it was amazing. It was all these documents and books and pictures, a lot of photographs. Um, and a lot of those photographs I put in my book because, just as you said, this is not fiction. I wanted to let people know these are real people, and these stories really happened to them.
Mm.
So that was the start of my journey. And then, because I I tried to use Google Translate and Microsoft Translate and all those, and Hungarian is an impossible language. It's so
Oh.
hard. So I got almost nowhere with that. And then I actually tried to start building a family tree, and tried to do it you know, not in a software program, just, with 3 by 5 cards on a cardboard backing. And it got to be my whole office was taken over with this. So I decided to put it in software. So yeah, that was the start of my journey. But as I said, because I didn't understand Hungarian, I didn't understand any of these documents. So through a friend of a friend, I actually found somebody a Hungarian woman who was just remarkable. And I just took one of the folders up to her house. She lives about a half an hour from me. And I thought I'd be there for an hour. We were there like all afternoon, and we could have gone on for days. And she said, first of all, these are remarkable documents, and some of them belong in a museum, and you really need to have it researched. And she opened my eyes to all of this context that I didn't understand, history and so on. So she put me in touch with a Hungarian friend of hers, András Gazitsky, who was truly just the most remarkable person and an incredible sleuth. He was just brilliant. And that started a, 7-year journey investigating, looking into my family's history.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I feel, just naturally to ask you what has been pulling you to do that? Obviously, like I said, I've been discovering my family history and, putting things together for my family and wanting to go back to, it was Kentucky is where my mom's from, and kind of, putting roots there and finding out more. But what has been calling you to do this?
Well, I think it's interesting. I'm in my 60s, and I think by not knowing my history, you know, I didn't know my grandparents. I knew my grandmothers, but my grandmother was also, very silent um about her background and her ancestors. And I think I felt like I didn't have those roots. I was like wobbly, I didn't know who I was. And I really wanted to understand. First of all, I really wanted to know more about Margit. And I wanted to understand where I came from and who I really was. I think it helped me on this journey. And I think also part of it, even though I said, that this discovery didn't really phase me, and I think it didn't at the time, though I think there was something deep, buried deep, that I was angry at my father for keeping these secrets. I was really angry, it's like, and I think when you're young and there's secrets, but you don't understand what they are and why, sometimes you think there's something wrong with you, why aren't they telling me these things? What's wrong with me? And I think I just all of those factors sort of came in at once, and I just wanted to discover who I was.
And that's beautiful. And even now, with that, as you're discovering and putting all of these pieces together, do you feel like now you can say who you are and who I am?
Yeah, I think there's several things. Um, I think I was able to forgive my father and release a lot of that anger. I think also I do have a better sense, like, I have roots, I didn't understand that I didn't have roots, and so I think that has helped a lot. And I will tell you, one of the most remarkable things, I discovered cousins. I never thought we'd have cousins. So one of the cousins, it turns out, is in California,
Wow.
and so he came to visit a couple times, and then we all went to Hungary together because I can talk about it later, but there's a permanent exhibit based on my family stories in the Rombach Synagogue. So we went to Hungary for the exhibit celebration. But before that, when we first met, he was here, and he said to me, he said, "Oh my God, you are exactly like my mother. And I have the same mannerisms and so on as his mother." So, it's like these family, even though we were, I don't know how many, we're not first cousins, but we're like third or fourth cousins. But I think these family genes were so strong that he was like, "Oh my God, you're just like my mother." And then I have to tell you, then when we were in Hungary and we had a lot of family and friends that came along with us for this celebration. And this friend, Yona, who really has helped me throughout with the book and so on. She was truly this voice in my ear saying, you got to keep going and keep going. But she took a look at his name is Miklos. She took a look at him and she goes, "Oh my God, he's just like your father." So, these family connections, they just become so meaningful. And I don't know how to put it in the
Mm,
best words, but
you did.
it's like they're truly deep and meaningful. So it was
I think you hit it on the nail. I loved that you said, meeting your cousins and connecting your family, because that has been one of the most eye-opening experiences for me on my end when it comes to just, getting out there and getting to know your roots. But and you spoke to someone helping you write the book. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that, the inspiration behind the book, um, what the book is about, and just,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
yeah.
so I'll go back to Andras. So we started working together, and as I said, he was just a remarkable sleuth and found things in places that I don't think anyone else can find. But there's 2 books that he found, and it was a result of a letter in the box. So there was a letter in the box from, um, the niece of my father's cousin to my father, telling him about I don't know exactly. But then, so Andras got in touch with that niece because she still lived in Budapest, and she actually gave him a book that Sigmund Pulitzer, who actually happens to be Miklos's great-great-grandfather, he had written a biography that detailed the family from the 1700s to he died in 1920. So up until his death. So as we're researching the stories, and the one thing about Andras that was incredible, he had to verify everything. So if he found something in the book, he would go to all these other sources and make sure they were true. So he didn't want to put anything that wasn't the truth in there, which was very difficult because we're talking about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there was the Latin language was the official language, then German, then Hungarian, and then all these other, I mean, the empire was huge. So you look at all these different languages, and then they weren't specific about their spelling. So Pulitzer could be spelled with an O, with a U, with 2 L's. I mean, many different ways. So he always had to make sure that we were talking about the right family member. So it was an incredible job that he really did. But as he was making all these discoveries, I I realized that my history was not good enough. So I did a tremendous amount of history reading, biographies, anything I could get my hands on so I could really truly understand the zeitgeist of the times. And then I had to organize it, and the best way to organize it was just to write it. So I actually wasn't intending to write a book, but it sort of became a book because of everything that I had to put together, and I had to put it in context and so on and so forth. So that's how the book evolved. So,
That's
yeah.
so inspiring. I love that. And that's,
Thank
uh,
you.
yeah, that's to me, that's the universe saying, or God saying, basically this needs to happen once you have that realization, once it's all being put together. Um, what do you think? and this is just because I'm thinking everything that you're doing is so important for people to hear. What do you think families today can learn from your story about the importance of preserving and sharing history?
My goodness. I think again, it goes back to I think we are all a product of our ancestors. So the more we know about our ancestors, the more I think we learn about ourselves. And I think that to me is the importance. And I kick myself because um and it probably goes back to the anger with my father too. You know, had I learned some of these stories before, and if I could have asked my grandmother, my father's mother, about these people, because when you read about these people, they just had incredible stories and they were incredible people. And it's not, one of the things about them, and when you read about almost every generation, they started out um with that with either desperately poor or with not much. They, through education and hard work, they built their lives. They actually, some of them became quite wealthy, very wealthy, and then they lost it all due to certain circumstances. So, and circumstances, really truly cataclysmic events, like the Napoleonic War back, Morris Pulitzer was the first doctor that we knew about the family. He was murdered by Napoleon's soldiers. And then, you go through almost every generation and, they lived through these incredible wars and, persecution and then you come to the Holocaust and certainly, we know what happened there. So these family members, they were so resilient. And through it all, they also were all about service and generosity and compassion through, all of them. Even Margit, there's a story about Margit after the war. Basically, she lost everything. She had three, her home in Pest, her home in Buda. She had a beautiful villa in Buda with incredible gardens. She lost that, and they had a 10,000-acre estate outside of Budapest, a farm that they lost. So they lost everything. And then she comes back to her home in Pest, which was, bombed out and she had to repair it and so on. And she has almost nothing. And yet she gives a room filled with furniture to a mother who lost her husband in the war and who had nothing. So even though she had nothing, she was all about giving to others and doing for others. And that's just one example of so many examples. And so I think for us today, we're living through really tough times. And if we can sort of keep that spirit of generosity and compassion and a vision hopefully for a better future, to be that resilient and that gener generous of spirit. I think we need to maintain it. And that's sort of the inspiration, I think, of this of my family members.
I love that. And a
Thank
part
you.
of you, I mean, it even feels like there's the part of you that's preserving it for your family and the generations to come to have like almost like a roadmap of knowing to find this information. And I kind of wanted to go back to what you were speaking about the museum.
Right.
That's such a beautiful way to honor your family, to keep like the knowing within the generations. But I'd love for
Right.
you to speak on that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Rumbach synagogue it's architecturally a stunning synagogue. It was a small synagogue, and it's one of, three main synagogues that were in Budapest. The biggest being, if you're a reader, your listeners have traveled to Budapest, they've probably gone to the Dohane Synagogue, which is huge and truly beautiful. But the Rambach is only it's a couple blocks away. It's like 2 or 3 blocks, a 5-minute walk, and, um, and smaller, but truly architecturally stunning. And it had not been repaired at all, since World War II. It was pretty much destroyed. And what, 5 well, probably now 10 years ago, they decided they were going to rebuild it, and, the government gave them money, they raised a lot of money and restored it to its true, magnificence. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to put a permanent exhibit on an upper floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, um, really to inspire others to look into their own background. And what happened was is Andras was doing his research, he was doing a lot of his research at the, Hungarian Jewish Museum and Archives, and he knew all of those people too. And, and so they said, "Hey, we want this exhibit. Can we use the Pulitzer family as the basis for the exhibit?" So that's how it came about, and it's made up of 10 really beautiful films, that are based on the stories in the book, really, on each person. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. And
Yeah.
there's is that it's open to the public, right? Like, we could
It's open to
go
the
to the
public. Now, I will say during the winter months, um, it it they they're Hungary is having a really difficult time, and especially museums are having a difficult time, so sometimes in the winter, they've closed it because it's too cold, they can't keep the heating on, um, but for the most part, it's, spring, summer, fall, it's open to the public. Yeah,
That's beautiful. And
yeah.
I think one of the things that I love the most about your story is just the connection between finding your family, finding this rich history, seeing the connections. Like, I read your 6th grade aunt is immortalized in a painting.
Yes.
Right.
So
That
so let me tell you about that because that's again Miklós's side, Zygmunt. So Zygmunt Politzer, and Politzer, married Irma Pulitzer with the U. Uh, Irma Irma is Joseph Pulitzer of the Pulitzer Prize fame, Joseph Pulitzer's cousin, first cousin. And apparently they were we actually found, letters between Adam Pulitzer and Joseph Pulitzer, and they signed it cousin. I don't know if they were truly cousins or just, very close friends, but the families definitely knew each other. So any rate, Irma was one of 4 sisters, and her sister Serena is purported, who knows, Klimt was a real womanizer, so who know he supposedly had lots of affairs. I don't know if Serena was one of them, but supposedly Serena had Klimt over for dinner every Friday. So for Shabbat dinner. So any rate, that's, he painted Serena and he painted a number of other, Pulitzers too, so and actually his brother did a pencil sketch, which I include of Adam, which is, a big deal because they didn't usually, do other than beautiful women, like the women in gold, the movie Women in Gold, those kinds of paintings, so, yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
A funny connection. Then
Yeah,
your mother too, she's honored at, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, Yad Vashem?
Yad Vashem, yes, so Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum in, Israel, and, she was honored as righteous among nations. And that is basically the highest honor that the Israeli government gives to non-Jews who saved Jews during the Holocaust. So most everybody knows about Oskar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg and Irina Sendler. Those are the 3 most famous, but yeah, my mom is her name is up on the wall at, the the Garden of Remembrance, Garden of Honor, I think, at Yad Vashem, along with their names. So, yeah, my mother's story is truly an incredible story too, so she met my father when they were in medical school. They were, and in Hungary at the time, you went directly from high school into a professional school, so medical school, law school, whatever. You didn't have college in between. And so they met as 18-year-olds in 1942. And what was interesting about Hungary, Hungary stayed out of the war largely until 1944. But then in 1944, when the Germans marched in, it was intense, very intense, and, something like 600,000 Jews were murdered, and between then, March '44 and, basically February '45, so it was incredible and very intense, and my father actually, and this is something that absolutely shocked me. I didn't know that my father was, conscripted into a Nazi labor camp. So, yeah, so we had no idea. Now, it was a labor camp. It wasn't, the concentration camps, but I had no idea of that. And in the meanwhile, my mom's, best friend, who was a childhood friend, and they were very close and remained close until their deaths, um, she was also Jewish. And she came to my mother and asked her, she said, sh I'll back up, her name was Ava, and Ava had a boyfriend who was a rabbi. And the rabbi's, friend had a factory which had to be shuttered. So, there even though the war didn't come to 1944, there were a lot of anti-Jewish laws that had put in place, and so people weren't allowed to go to school, Jews weren't allowed to hold professions, they were not allowed to own a business, they were not allowed to have Christian servants, and so on and so forth. So it was very traumatic leading up to that. But so he had to his name was Armin. Armin had to shutter his factory. So Ava came to my mother and said, "Would you move into this shuttered factory and hide my family, the rabbi's family, Armin's family?" And then she ended up hiding a lot of other people, and I didn't know this at all, but found out afterwards that when they ran out of space in the factory, they actually started to hide people in the histology lab at the medical school. So and then my father escaped from labor camp with 5 other men, when the labor camp was bombed, and then he made his way back to, Budapest and hid, she hid him, and she hid my grandmother also. So but none of I didn't learn about this until, much, much, much later.
But that's
So
such a I love that. That's I mean, like, when I think about it, I'm thinking you're carrying such rich history with you now, and being able to tell the story and just allow us, kind of a viewpoint in, is so remarkable to me. I think that's amazing.
yeah, I mean, my mother was, when you think about it, an 18-year-old, and I will tell you, it was, what it meant hiding these people was daily terror, because almost daily the Arrow-Cross, and the Arrow-Cross were the Hungarian Nazis, and they were worse than the Nazis. Like, when Eichmann marched into Budapest, he said, "Oh, we don't need as many Nazis because the Arrow-Cross are they do our job for us." They were worse, they were horrible. But, almost daily, the Arrow-Cross would knock on the gate of it was a factory complex, so it had a house and a smaller servant's house, and then the factory building, and it was surrounded by a tall gate, and they had a couple dogs that would, guard the gate, and, so daily they would knock on the gate, and my mother would come to the gate, she said, as slowly as possible, which, the dogs would bark, so it would give everybody sort of a chance to get into their hiding places. And then, and then she would open the gate, and they would come and march in. But in the fall of '44, yeah, it was the fall of '44, what happened was, um, before it was the Allies, mostly the Americans and the British bombing Budapest, and she said they would bomb almost on schedule, so, they could sort of, you know, get out of the way, shall we say. But when the Russians took over bombing, they just bombed indiscriminately day and night. They never stopped. So the dogs became confused, and then when they got a knock on the door, the dogs hadn't barked. So it didn't allow the time for everybody to find their hiding places. So they scrambled and got into their hiding places. But my mom, said there was one story she told me, and she said they marched in and the rabbi had left his siddur on the kitchen countertop. And thank God she saw that before, the Air Cross soldiers saw it. And so then, she quickly, hid it in her lap and, thank goodness, because had they actually discovered it, everyone would have been shot. So
Oh my god.
it's, that's the kind of thing that she faced on a daily basis, and then you add to that there was no food, no, it, it was one of the coldest winters in Budapest and no heat, and I mean what they lived through was truly remarkable.
That is, and your mother's a hero, thank God for her, and
Yes.
thank God for their quick, thinking and moving on their part.
Yeah.
Once again, just love your story. I love the components, and I just love how you're absorbing so much history, retelling it, and giving us a book and ways to just kind of learn about, the history of the world and what we've been through.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask about, going back to your book, what was the hardest part about writing it?
Mm, I'm not sure it was hard. I I think learning about the history and putting these stories into context was, um, I can say it was hard, but it was sort of a labor of love. I mean, I really loved learning about the history. As far as actually writing it, I think the hardest part of writing it was probably the last chapters about the war, the Holocaust, and really learning about what they lived through. And I'll give you, a little bit more. One of the books that Andras found, that this niece had told him about, was another book that my father's cousin wrote. My father's cousin, was 10 years old when the Germans marched in 1944, and he was autistic. So he had an unbelievable memory. He remembered all the details about everything. He could tell you what the weather was, 10 years ago and specific date. I mean, he was a lot like Dustin Hoffman's character in The Rain Man. He remembered everything. He was a musical genius, but the emotional piece was missing. So he wrote this book about his time from 1944 to 1945. And he described, the clothes people wore, the food they ate, the music they listened to. But, sort of in all of that, we also were, and he, by the way, he used fake names for everybody. So we had to sort of decipher who was who. But some of them were pretty obvious. Um, but we learned about, what they did, how they survived, where they lived, how horrible the conditions were, like, I mean, it was just remarkable. And so, I learned a lot about my mom and my dad during those years. Without that book, I wouldn't have, understood what they really went through. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's so remarkable, and I'm glad that you got that, you got that portion of learning about your parents in that way because that's so so beautiful, you
Yeah.
know?
There's
I know
that Also, I had also found in the box there were letters between my mom and dad when my dad was in the labor camp. So the conditions in the labor camp were horrific. Also, so yeah, yeah,
Can only imagine. What
yeah.
um what do you hope readers will walk away after they finish your book?
Well, I think there's a couple levels. One is what we talked about. I think it's really important to understand your own history. And truly, by understanding your own history, you get a window not into only your ancestors, but to who you are and what made you, who you are. So that's one thing. And if they can, start talking to parents and grandparents and great grandparents if they're alive, um, as I said, I so wish that I had been able to talk to my grandmother about these stories because she would have known people like Adam Pulitzer and so on. Um, and then also, I think the one of the biggest messages is that we need, and my mother brought us up this way. She always said, it's so important that you treat everybody with dignity and respect and compassion. It doesn't matter what their religion is, what their skin color is, what their ethnicity is, what their economic status is. Every single person deserves respect, dignity, and compassion. And she lived that and she drummed that into us. And so then when you look at these stories, that's one, how they lived, but also they were all about, as I said before, service to humanity. They really, it didn't matter what their circumstances were, they believed in serving humanity.
Mm,
So, that to take that kind of inspiration, um, that's sort of the what inspired me about my family.
very inspiring. I honestly, your mother's a hero, your dad's a hero, you're a hero. I
Oh,
love,
good.
yeah, I love the direction that you've taken with, the history that you've learned about your family and really just, keeping it alive and honoring them. And yeah, it's beautiful. I think it's definitely something that if my listeners are really listening and really catching, the angle and direction you're taking this in, it'll help inspire them to do the same for their lineage and their families and get that much closer. So thank you so much, Linda, for sharing your story, for sharing your book. I would love for you before we go for, if anyone wants to follow you or anyone wants to buy your book, we'll leave all the details in the show notes. But if you
Right.
want to leave that information now.
Sure. Well, first of all, I have a website, which is just pulitzersaga.com. And then I'm on Facebook, Linda Broenniman author, and Instagram, same thing. So yeah, Linda Broenniman author. Yeah. And
Perfect.
the book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the usual places. And if anyone lives in Buffalo, then it's also at Talking Leaves bookstore. And actually, it just got put into the Holocaust Museum here in
Oh,
DC.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, yes, we'll leave all of the details in the show notes. If anyone wants to follow Linda, if anyone wants to buy the book. Thank you again, Linda, for being here. I truly appreciate you. And I can't wait to continue to watch your journey and to learn more about all of the history that you are unpacking for us. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really been just a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it and an honor to be on your show. So thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. All right,
Thanks.
guys, until next time.
Thanks.
Hey guys, it's Icarus here.
And Amelia.
And I'm here to tell you if you'd like to join our brand new adventure. Go to DevonTaylorAuthor.com to learn more.
And check out the cool items like the new bucket hat.
Yeah, and so much more. See you guys there. So far.